My name is Alexis Dugan, and I have the pleasure of hosting today's webinar. Before we begin, we would like to inform our online audience that you have the ability to ask questions by typing them in the chat box located at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to type your questions during the presentation. I will be making note of them, organizing them, and during the last 10 to 15 minutes or so, I will share them with our presenters for discussion. For our attending members who will be requesting continuing education credits, please be sure to sign in via the sign-in form provided in the chat box. And please be sure to complete the evaluation, which will be provided at the end of this program in the chat box. And please don't forget to put your first and last name. At this time, I will introduce and welcome our speakers. Dr. Julia VanderMolen is an associate professor of public health within the School of Interdisciplinary Health at Grand Valley State University. Dr. VanderMolen received her Ph.D. in educational leadership with an emphasis in career and technical education from Western Michigan University. She has an MED in educational technology from Grand Valley State University, a MA in health science from the University of Alabama, and an MS in biology from Clemson University. Dr. Julia VanderMolen is the recipient of a number of awards for inclusive teaching, and she has expertise in online learning and currently provides expertise to multiple organizations in health education, health promotion, health literacy, online teaching and learning, and assistive technology. Dr. VanderMolen's recent work has included the benefits of 3D printing for the visually impaired, the concept of universal design as it relates to public health and disability policy. Dr. VanderMolen currently serves as a board member of the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired. She is an active member of the disability section, the food and nutrition of the American Public Health Association, APHA, and the Great Lakes chapter of the Society of Public Health Education, GLC, SOPHE, where she is currently serving as the president-elect. Dr. Courtney Ward-Sutton is an assistant professor in the Rehabilitation Counseling Program at the University at Buffalo in the Department of Counseling School and Educational Psychology. Originally from Raleigh, North Carolina, she holds a Ph.D. in Rehabilitation Counseling and Counselor Education at North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University. Dr. Sutton completes her postdoctoral research fellowship at the Advanced Rehabilitation Research and Training ARRT program within the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center, RRTC, on research and capacity building for minority entities at Langston University. Although her clinical experience has been diverse, her primary research interests include assistive technology access and awareness among diverse populations, multicultural counseling and counselor education issues, and behavioral health addictions. With over 10 years of experience in rehabilitation counseling as an advocate, practitioner, and educator, Dr. Sutton has played a central role in developing grants presented at over 20 states, national and international conferences, and published several peer-reviewed journal articles on research findings. Dr. Ward-Sutton is also a National Association of Multicultural Concerns NAMRIC board member. Dr. VanderMolen and Dr. Ward-Sutton, we are honored to have you both join us today. At this time, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alexis, for that warm introduction. And Courtney, I'll go first if you don't mind.
Yes, of course.
And I've already told Daniel this story, but I'm going to tell the story again. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that I reached out to Courtney in 2020. Courtney wrote an article that I was just like, wow, this is perfect. This is what I exactly want to do for my sabbatical work. And I'm like, I'm going to reach out to Courtney, Dr. Ward-Sutton, and say, would you be interested in talking to me? And I'm like, it's going to be a long shot. I didn't think I'd actually hear from anybody. And lo and behold, 2 days later, seriously, 2 days later, I got an email from Courtney, and she said, I would be happy to talk to you. And I was like, I was so over the moon that I got that email. I'm like, this is going to happen. I'm going to be able to do my sabbatical work, and I've got everything to base it on because of her. So with that said, I'm going to also give you the history behind what everything happened. And as Alexis alluded to, I'm a board member of the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and I'm also a board member of the Disability Advocates of Kent County in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And through my sabbatical work, we wanted to we develop a program called RISE, Reaching Inclusive Sustainable Employment for Persons with Low Vision and Blindness. But we didn't know what human resource management professionals were aware of and their knowledge of assistive technology. And that's where Courtney's article came into play. And I really wanted to hit home on that. And we created what you're going to see today, and then some of the results from that. So I just want to kind of give you that little backstory. Courtney, do you want to add anything to that?
Not that I could think of, but just being honored that a fellow researcher out in the field reached out to me to want to move this agenda forward with looking at assistive technology in the workplace. So yes, that's it. And thank you everyone for attending today, and I hope you enjoy our presentation.
So the purpose of our presentation today is to kind of bring that awareness and to discuss what employers' awareness is, and then the knowledge behind their use of assistive technology and workplace accommodations for individuals or persons with disabilities. And we did take this into great depth, and we've got a second round of data that we'll talk a little bit about later, but it's to help figure out how we can have the, I don't want to say best practice, because the best practice is always being trumped, but to look at the leading practice and leading hiring practices that will help improve the workforce that we have out there and make improvements to training for both the individual with the disability and the individuals who are doing the hiring. So in our focus group, in our study, we started out by doing a focus group, and that focus group helped us to kind of create and gain insight to a survey that we sent out actually statewide first. We're going to hopefully send it out nationally. And that assesses like small to medium companies, but we ended up extending it a little further. And again, looking at the awareness and knowledge of assistive technology and workplace accommodations. And from here on out, I may go ATWA. And again, those practices. And looking at from a hiring managers and human resource management professionals lens. And from there, trying to figure out where can we provide training for human resource professionals so that they can do what's best in the workplace for individuals.
And next slide, if you can. All right. So today we'll be discussing some of our research when looking at the focus group findings that aim to gain insight for developing a survey, and that assesses small to mid-sized companies, as mentioned earlier, and the awareness and knowledge of ATWA best practices used by hiring managers and human resource management, professionals for employing persons with low vision or blindness. Additionally, we'll discuss training improvements that are needed to help diversify the workforce for people with disabilities. And lastly, we'll provide recommendations to inform human resource management professionals, current hiring practices, and future trainings. And we'll also have a discussion at the end to hear all of the attendees what some of the current practices that you may utilize, or questions or suggestions that you may have from us based on the research and the findings for here today. And so we look forward to that discussion towards the end. Next slide, please. Also, while we were giving the presentation, and we'll circle back to these questions at the end, we want you to kind of consider within your organization that you currently work for or company, are you aware of the budget for disability accommodations, or who would be that person of contact, or what that budget may look like? And does the ADA require that an applicant or an employee with a disability be qualified for the position? So that's a little food for thought, or just to be thinking about, that we're going to circle back towards the end of the presentation to discuss. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So for our study, we looked at the purpose was to evaluate the knowledge and training of ATWAs received by human resource managers or professionals of organizations. And again, we primarily looked at like manufacturing and small to mid-sized companies. And I think that that's actually going to start to snowball once we get into larger companies. But the methods, we surveyed about 114 human resource professionals with various titles who were members of 2 chapters of Michigan Society of Human Resource Management. And as luck would have it, we not only did we run the data for just the two organizations, but we also presented at a conference, and that added to our size. And it was the Michigan Human Resource Management Conference, and we actually ended up getting some good survey results from that as well. And we'll get back to that later. But our results, proved that there was a lack of knowledge of assistive technology in workplace accommodations and accessibility and community resources for AT and WA, training for human resource professionals. And in conclusion to that, we wanted to provide quality and continuous ATWA training for HR professionals, as it's necessary to close that gap in knowledge. And there is a strong gap in knowledge, as we've discovered in our data. Next slide, please. So with that said, one of the things that we started out with, and we wanted to kind of discuss as we started with the focus group, was to provide some background knowledge. What do we know already, and what do hiring professionals actually know? And some of the things that we did know from literature is that negative employer attitudes are longstanding problems for people with disabilities, not being aware of what kind of accommodations are truly needed for that individual, limited research on hiring characteristics of employers for job seekers with disabilities. And I actually experienced this with the RISE program, the Reaching Inclusive Sustainability Employment, is we found out that a couple organizations here in Michigan were not aware of being able to provide screen readers for persons with low vision or were blind. So they weren't aware of that. So, and then the employer attitudes is essential, as it's often associated with behaviors such as hiring. And I actually had another experience with this one. A colleague of mine, her cousin is paralyzed from the neck down, and he struggled to get the second interview. Once they got to the second interview, and they found out that he had a disability, he often got cut from the interview, whether it's the first or second, but nonetheless, we think that had played a role in it. And then excluding persons with disabilities from employment opportunities is linked to social organizations, and it's also linked to social determinants of health, and that's where the public health lens comes into play. Next slide, please.
So for the methods for the research study, we had, once again, a total of 514 completed surveys in which members of the LHRMA completed, and we had 175. And then for the KHRMA, we had a total of 339 completed. With the survey, it was distributed at monthly meetings with incentive of 10 $25 gift cards. And the research for the IRB and research study purposes was completed at the University of Grand Valley State University, where Dr. Julia presides there. And within some of the research, just to know how in-depth or how tedious it was through the process, the IRB, and I know we talked back and forth, had to be amended at least 5 times to have it completed. And she could speak to that process and the rigor of the research and finding companies to apply and actually administer the survey. She could give her testimony to that. And we had a return rate of 12.5, or excuse me, 12.45. With administering the surveys. In regards to the survey design, it was a cross-sectional survey with multiple choice and a 5-point Likert scale. And some of the questions that were addressed, and we'll go into depth in the following slides, was the demographics, accessible and inclusive applications and interviews, accommodations for applications and interviews, assistive technology, and accommodations for employees. Next slide, please. So for the survey demographics, we asked job title, education, years of experience, and industry type, and what that may look like. For job title, are you an assistant, business partner, director, manager, specialist, VP, and other? And when looking at industry type, your classification, was it education, food service, healthcare, manufacturing? Was it a nonprofit, professional service, retail, or technology?
Great, thank you for that, Courtney. The survey, we looked at it and then taking what Courtney had built upon, or built upon what Courtney has done in the past, is we looked at training questions for human resource professionals, and we wanted to take a look at whether or not their company or organization would be interested in assistive technology and workplace accommodation training. And the survey results did prove that, yes, there is a need, and we'd like to see what that means. The next one was, does your organization or company offer diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility? And often times most people just go DEIA. Well, the A has been added to that. So that's where the accessibility DEIA came into play. But now, as of the study, they've actually added another letter, DEIA B, for belonging, training for employees. And a lot of companies are now working on those initiatives. The next question was that, does your company or organization have an accessibility officer or an individual who oversees this function? And a number of companies who responded said that they did not have one. And the reason why this was important, there's a saying out there called, and it reads, "Nothing about us without us." So there's not an accessibility or person with disabilities sitting on a DEIA initiative program within the company or organization. And then finally, what is your familiarity with the community resources for training for assistive technology and workplace accommodation? And this too provided us with incredible insight, as a number of human resource managers and professionals were not aware that there are certain organizations that can provide training for assistive technology and workplace accommodations for persons with disabilities, from the hiring lens and for the individual who may need the training with the disability. Next slide, please.
So survey, we had a comfort section. So we asked individuals, what is your comfort level in advocating at all levels of the organization or company for reasonable accommodations? And some of us may take that for granted or think, it's a regular question that you should ask, but not a lot of people may feel comfortable within their role or knowing specifically how to do so appropriately. Additionally, we explored, what is your comfort level in teaching direct leadership about the reasonable accommodation process and other programs that may benefit employees. And so with this, it was done over the Likert scale. So 1 was very comfortable, 2 uncomfortable, 3 neutral, 4 comfortable, and 5 very comfortable. We asked individuals to respond to. Next slide, please.
We also wanted to address the familiarity of human resource managers and professionals with regards to what their organization or company protocol for inviting applicants for an interview, an individual who has a disability. And we also wanted to look at what their familiarity with their local Department of Rehabilitation agency may have or provide to their organization. And for this purpose of this presentation, we briefly will discuss a few of the familiarity domains: vision, upper mobility, and cognitive. Hearing and lower mobility may also be discussed if we have time. But for the Likert scale, for this particular one, we looked at familiarity as being 1, not familiar, 2, slightly familiar, 3, somewhat familiar, and 4, moderately familiar, and 5, extremely familiar. Next slide, please. So with this particular one, this one actually is my favorite, because I'm, again, sitting on the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired board, we looked at, and this is where, again, stemmed from, is having the awareness, HR professionals and companies and organizations having awareness of what materials or what accommodations can be made for a person with low vision or blindness. And oftentimes they were aware of large print, computers with voice input, a computer with voice input, screen readers. This one was a tricky one because there's multiple types of screen readers. And though JAWS was the most prevalent, there are other screen readers out there that were not, that companies were not aware of. And magnification software was another. And then electronic note takers and raised letters on room labels and accessible organization and company websites. Now, the last piece is something that the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired is working right now to develop training of companies with accessible documents and accessible websites, because this is quite problematic and it's been brought to light in the last, I want to say maybe 2 to 3 months, that we're trying to make sure that instead of retrofitting a website so that we can actually have an accessible website from the get-go, and creating accessible documents has been an issue for a number of companies. And this is a great way to kind of provide even employment services for individuals who have low vision or blindness. And this was done on a scale, oops, it's okay. If this too was done on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not familiar and then 5 being extremely familiar. Thank you, Alexis. Sorry about that. The other familiar, the upper mobility was also a challenge for some, looking at making trackballs easier for manipulation. And when we think about using something like a trackball with assistive technology, it may be for somebody who doesn't necessarily have a chronic disability, but somebody who has acute disability and maybe has carpal tunnel, or maybe has had hand surgery and needs that change. Touch screens and ergonomic keyboards were also a challenge to look at. Some were very familiar with it, and some were moderately familiar with it, and others were definitely familiar with ergonomic keyboards. A speech amplification was one that was not utilized as often, and then eye mobility was definitely at the lower end of being not familiar. Next slide, please. With regards to cognitive, this is one I'm actually working on too, looking especially from a cognitive, looking at individuals autistic persons, I should say, and looking at memory aids and pop-up timers, for example, and alarms set on phones. And looking at those accommodations are not just for somebody with a cognitive disability, but somebody who may need that to kind of keep them on track. Recorder devices is another one. Smartphones and tablets. And telephone auto dialers are very useful. And then we did find that some were very familiar, or moderately familiar with telephone auto dialers. And then voice output with optical character recognition to read documents, or use reading pens was somewhat familiar. Next slide, please.
When exploring the importance of hiring, we asked, how would you rate the importance of communication by senior leadership in the organization or company's commitment to recruiting and hiring people with disabilities? And some of the information for within this area for hiring, there was 12 questions in this domain. And to give an example of what a participant said during the focus group, when asking about the survey that we were trying to develop, one individual said organizations should be added to like question 2, and should the questions be consistent in each question when we were asking about it as feedback from a participant within the focus group. Another participant also asked, I personally, just because of the community that I serve, reasonable accommodation could be many different ways. Others may not know what is reasonable, and it is a deep subject. And what works for persons who are deaf and hard of hearing may differ from other individuals with different types of disabilities. So that was some of the survey feedback we got when asking about these questions and relating to importance of hiring. Next slide, please. When looking at the results in regards to demographics, out of the 64 individuals who completed the questioning addressing job title or role, 20 individuals, which is around 31%, were managers. Out of the 64 individuals who completed the question addressing the level of education, around 35, which was 54%, had a bachelor's degree. And out of the 61 individuals who completed the question addressing years of experience, roughly 31% of the individuals had 0 to 5 years of experience, and 31% of individuals had 6 to 10 years of experience. And so that is also why you can see variation in accommodations that may be provided when looking at individuals' comfort level as they're getting more experience within the field and learning about their company that they actually work for and the individuals who may be applying for different jobs. Next slide, please. When exploring training questions, out of the 61 individuals who completed the questions on interest in assistive technology and workplace accommodation training, 27, which was 44%, were interested, which is I still find intriguing. Only 44% were interested or might not be that aware and wanting to know more. So it makes me think, as this is an interest for me, what can we do more to make individuals interested in wanting to employ this with their individuals that they hire. And so that is almost another research area that I want to dive into later as to why people may or may not be interested in training. And then when looking at the 61 individuals who completed the question in regards to the DEIA training, roughly 55% reported that their company or organization did not offer it. So I'll let everyone sit in with that half of the companies and organizations didn't even offer that. Next slide, please. As we're continuing looking at training questions, out of the 61 individuals who completed the question, roughly 62% reported that their company organization did not have an accessibility officer. Out of the 49 individuals who completed the question, which was roughly 44%, were not familiar with community resources for training for assistive technology and workplace accommodations. And that kind of scares me. And as my background as a rehabilitation counselor, it kind of, that's why a lot of resources are unused, untapped, or why, unfortunately, at the end of the year, a lot of money gets sent back to different states. Next slide, please.
Yep, and I'm going to add to Courtney's. I actually am a colleague of mine, used to be the rehabilitation counselor for Rehabilitation Services of Michigan, and she's now taken a new position. And we're finding out that not only do companies and organizations within the state of Michigan are not aware of those services, but individuals with a disability are also not aware of those services. So they often go, jobs often go untapped, if you will. So that's been an eye-opener for me from anecdotally and knowing a person who used to work in that field. But with this one, of the 52 individuals who answered the question, 41 or 78% were extremely familiar with their organization's protocol for inviting applicants for an interview. However, I'm going to put a however in that, they're still not aware of making the accessibility accommodations with regards to the hiring documentation. So having documentations like PDF documents not accessible to an individual with low vision, for example, or having not the building laid out correctly, or having braille on the doors such that so somebody could come in and know where they're going for their interview. The other thing that we looked at is 52 individuals who answered the question. 18 or 34.6% were not at all familiar with their local Department of Rehabilitation agency. And this is, again, like as Courtney alluded to, this is frightening, because they're an agency that can really provide a good workforce for companies who are looking to hire. And right now, a lot of companies are having those problems of hiring individuals who want to stay and work. Next slide, please. So to break it down even further, we have, again, the scale was from 1 to 5. And of the 49 individuals who looked at it from each piece, you can see here, I'm not going to totally read them all to you, but you can see that at least the hearing, there was low levels of familiarity in the hearing and how to make accommodations for individuals who are from the deaf and hard of hearing community, and from the cognitive. And I actually had a great conversation with a colleague of mine who actually hires autistic persons. And autistic person, there's also a good commercial that came out too, but well, that's neither here nor there. But the two here, and you're actually saying the upper mobility too, and how we make those accommodations. And so we have to kind of think about how we're going to train to ensure that we are making those accommodations. And again, the low familiarity is like a 2 to 3 point value on that one. So again, most of it was somewhat familiar. So how do we get them to that next, how do we get hiring managers and human resource professionals to be more at the higher end, which is at extremely familiar or familiar? Next slide, please. So the comfort level was, again, basing the scale on a one very uncomfortable to 5 being very comfortable. You can see here that 49 individuals who did answer this comfort question said that they were comfortable or very comfortable with advocating, which is fabulous. Okay, we want people to advocate for individuals with disabilities so in the workforce. So a majority of them were comfortable to almost being very comfortable with working and and advocating for reasonable accommodations. And then of the 49 who answered the question, said that they were comfortable or very comfortable with teaching direct leadership, which is another positive for our field. It's close to 4. So being comfortable and being sure that we let leadership know that we need to make these accommodations so we can expand the workforce. Next slide, please. So with this, the importance of hiring, I think we can all agree to this particular one. Of the 46 individuals, hiring individuals who answered this question, 23 or 78% said that communication by senior leadership on an organization's commitment to recruit and hiring people with disabilities was important or very important. And we actually, in our area, have actually seen this, and through the RISE program, we managed to get 5 organizations to hire. We're on our 3rd cohort now, and they've hired 2 individuals from every cohort. Our cohort's about the size of 5, so in our RISE program. So having 5 organizations or 5 companies being so open to hiring persons with disabilities is definitely a win-win for all of us. And again, it was at a 3.2 as a mean, so being pretty comfortable with doing that. Next slide, please.
Okay, discussion. So what does all of that mean? What are all those results? What are all those questions? What were we able to find? So through the research, when looking at HR professionals, the findings illustrate an overall lack of knowledge about ATWA accessibility and community resources for ATWA training that can make it difficult to attract people with disabilities into the workplace, as well as maintain the current people with disabilities employed to have a successful career. Additionally, results also highlight a gap, which was mentioned earlier, in the DIA training, and identified many individuals who could benefit from such trainings if they were in place or offered. And lastly, although HR professionals are comfortable with advocating for reasonable accommodations, results indicate that the majority are only somewhat familiar with the different categories of disabilities and their local department rehabilitation agencies. And so as you can see, there's a gap there, and something that we could do to try to explore more and to fulfill that gap, and to sharing more information and resources that are out there. And some of my previous research that I've done, it actually broke down when looking at individuals with disabilities that were actually using the AT workplace accommodations. What were they using? And it broke it down among their disability types. So what was most prevalent for individuals who had a vision disability or had hearing? What were their employers supplying for them? But that's in another research article that I had out there exploring that within the ATWA. Next slide, please. So when looking at strategies for providing ATWA for people with disabilities, we kind of thought about it once we reflected on the research and what we found. Creating an accessible and accommodating environment as mandated in federal nationwide public policies, which a lot of people may not know, or when you ask your employer, I have to provide a what, thinking it may be expensive. But it could be something as easy as just a flexible work schedule. Something that doesn't require any funds at all. So it's always, and we advocate to check your local laws as they constantly change. And you can also receive tax credits for employing some of the ATWA purchases, which often make employers happy. Also, it is suggested for strategy, including workplace accommodations such as ergonomic desk, which I know I've started seeing more within my place of employment because they actually, it was a study saying that sitting down, you know, how a lot of us have to sit down for hours, and as we're involved in more of these Zoom meetings, it's equaling to just as bad as if we were smokers. That impact on our bodies from just sitting, you know, still all day and working at a desk, where versus where you could stand and you can move around a little bit and you're not just confined to sitting all day. Um, Having different types of chairs that support, lighting, wheelchair ramps, speech communication devices, could be beneficial in other communication, braille note taking for computers, and other things to think about when using onboarding in the new hire process. So maybe to ask ahead instead of once they're already hired, and having to kind of work backwards as, okay, you're here, now what can we do? Instead of when bringing them on, you know, maybe asking ahead of time, will you need any accommodations? And if so, having those local community partners that you could reach out to provide that, or for them to learn or explore different options for their disability type. Also, and I know it's hard, but do not believe myths about AT and WA. And not all AT is expensive or complicated. AT is so broad. There's small tech, small AT, medium, and to high for it. It's in its advanced level. And we think about like small or low tech, it's eyeglasses, simple things like that, or readers that we could get, or within your cell phone if you put a reminder, or putting notes within your calendar. So it's low, inexpensive things that can be used that we may not think of or that we may take for granted, that can be employed to help individuals actually fill their job responsibilities and duties. And so that's something to keep in mind. And it's important for employers to work together with employees for an appropriate ATWA, and just to have those conversations. And, you know, someone may come in asking for something that is maybe unreasonable, but just letting them know or trying to work with them on a plan of action or what could be done to accommodate them. Next slide, please.
Thank you. The next thing we want to take a look at is how we strive to create an inclusive workspace. And we can do this by providing quality and inclusive ATWA training and continuous professional development for human resource professionals. And this actually just happened this week, so this is kind of serendipitous, is that the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired reached out, and we are now looking at not just human resource professionals, but we're now looking at career services at colleges and universities and how we can actually get them on board and start training everyone about how we make these continuous improvements to helping persons with disabilities into the workforce. And what we're looking at doing potentially is doing lunch and learns. And what does that lunch and learn curriculum look like, and how we start out? And we've decided to start out with learning, looking at documentation and creating accessible documents during the hiring process is the first line of defense, so to speak. The other thing that we're looking at is regularly including assessments for feedback from employees on available ATWA. And we haven't gotten that far yet, but it'd be interesting. And I think as we go through and provide more services, we'll be able to find out what is it that we really need to provide to persons with disabilities so that we can have the best learning environment. And that, you know, could go with anybody who is in the work environment as well. And then finally, creating community partnerships that foster AT trainings and workshops to promote more learning. And the two organizations that we reached out to were so excited about what we're doing, what Courtney and I are doing, that they've asked us. We already have people reaching out to us and going, can we do something about this? I'm like, yes, absolutely, because you know we have that workforce who want to work, and but getting HR professionals to have a better understanding is vital to what we need to do. And possible incentives for incorporating assistive technology for persons with disabilities within their companies. And I actually have one colleague too, believe it or not, she hires persons with low vision and individuals from the deaf and hard of hearing communities, and she's a chef. And she's actually providing companies with incentives out of her own grant funding so that they can work in the restaurant arena. And as you probably know, with COVID, the restaurants shut down, and then people didn't want to go back and work in the restaurants. And now she's got individuals with disabilities working for her and in these areas. So we are getting different companies to work with persons with disabilities, and we're making those accommodations and learning to promote better incentives for incorporating assistive technology and workplace accommodations. So that's just another thing that's again, it's kind of snowballed from our project. Next slide.
So now we welcome just open discussion to everyone who is participating today within this webinar, and circling back to those questions kind of we asked earlier. So if you feel comfortable enough or are willing to share any of your current practices that we could discuss or that we touched on, or if you wanted to elaborate a little bit more, as well as thinking back, do you know what your disability accommodation budget is or what that may look like? Or with the ADA at that question, does it require an applicant or an employee with a disability to be qualified for that position? So the floor is open.
And I will look in the chat for questions. Let me see if there are some questions within the chat here. Didn't look like we had any. Abby asked about getting the PowerPoints.
And we will share the PowerPoints, as well as towards the end, we do have our contact information. So if Abby or anybody else wanted additional resources or support, don't hesitate to reaching out to us, and we'll be happy to work with you or provide whatever additional resources you may need for your area where you're located at.
Does anyone have any questions or any other things that they would like to ask or say at this time? The floor is open. You can also put them in the chat. Jamie says, great study.
Thank you.
Vicky asks, what about accommodations for someone who has essential tremors and cannot type on a computer?
Do you want me to take that, or do you want to take that, Courtney? It's an assistive technology one for sure.
You could take it and I'll piggyback off of you once you
Sounds good.
finish.
Sounds good. So that's a good question. And one of the accommodations that could be made for somebody who has tremors, like AKA maybe even Parkinson's, is voice recognition of voice typing. And there are a number of tools out there, like it used to be called Dragon Dictate. I know it's changed. There's a program out there called Speech Notes, which is one of my favorites. Full disclosure, I'm dyslexic, so I do a lot with voice dictation to my grading and to a lot of my presentations, because I'm like, if I can speak it in, that's going to help me, and I kind of edit from there. So voice recognition, have a quality headset, which is very inexpensive. I have the one I have on my head is only like $35. And then speech notes and actually Microsoft has its own dictation. Google has its own dictation. I'm trying to think. Your phone also has its dictation. And one of the things I just learned, which is kind of cool, if you've got the new iPhone, if you go to Notes, it actually will scan a picture, and all you have to do is take a picture and it types it for you. So something to that nature can be done.
And all of those you mentioned were probably, except for the drag and the computer software, all of those are inexpensive or free that you can actually employ within the job site or personally, that you can use at home as well.
Thank you for your question, Vicki.
I worked with someone in vocational rehabilitation who had cerebral palsy, and she used Dragon, and she used a mic and a headset to do her notes and things of that nature. So it was very effective for her.
Wonderful.
And then I know, just thinking at a I guess, a lower level before if, that individual hasn't entered into the workforce, just thinking in a university setting, because my semester, it's beginning to start, and I'm getting memos and asking for accommodations already. They actually have note takers. And so they have professional note takers that will come to the class, take notes, and provide for those individuals as well. And so that could be another accommodation, depending on if the person wanted help or assistance to have someone to be personalized as a note taker for a couple hours if needed, to assist them as well, or if they work in teams or projects of what that may look like.
And Allison says this training has been very enlightening. Christine says very interesting. Thanks for sharing. Allison also says that she's using voice dictation on the phone to describe these notes into my Google Drive for future reference for grad school. It's very helpful. Deborah says this study highlights the need for a well-informed HR workforce regarding people with disabilities. I hope this is the beginning of an improvement in that field. And then we have two questions, one from Debbie and one from Abby. Debbie says, do you have any recommendations for AI or chat GPT tools? I know at my workplace it's restricted due to security issues, but do you have any recommendations?
Well, that's a great question. There's Chat GPT, but Google Bard, if you have a Google, if you have access to Google, that might be the way to go, is using Google Bard. It tends to be, I think it's better than Chat GPT. It's easier to use and it can go right into Google. So that might be something to take a look at.
And then I would also explore, although your workplace or may say like they can't employ it, but due to, certain federal laws, local laws, you have that right to accommodation. So that may be their policy, but it may not override what is the local and governing laws because they would be in violation of that. So that's something to often explore too. Just because they don't like it, they're going to have to offer another type of accommodation for you. Because once again, that'll be violating the ADA and other local laws and providing a reasonable accommodation for your disability type and need. That is a reasonable accommodation. So that's one advocacy that you could do for yourself. And you would have to work with the HR or the local agencies within the area that would know what type of accommodations and other routes that you could go. But there should be something that you should be able to employ at your job site, just because they say they don't like it or maybe afraid of certain technologies, because we are getting into that area or field with artificial intelligence. And so, but there has to be a line of advocacy in what you could do to have a productive and successful career as well.
Absolutely.
Abby says, I know someone who is recovering from paralysis. He's learning how to walk again and wants to work. He feels limited due to his disability. Any resources for him?
And what specific domain and him actually like going into employment or type of jobs where he could work from home, or like flexible work schedules where he could come in maybe twice a week. What type of accommodations in specific that you might be looking for him?
Probably working from home. Yeah, just because traveling, because he can't walk. Yeah, so he's still relearning how to walk.
Okay. There are one of the things that we're as COVID has provided for us, so to speak, is the fact that there's more remote work out there, and we can find those positions for him. Is what is he comfortable with doing, and what's the company able to do for him too with regards to making those accommodations. And again, Courtney brought it to light, is can it be a flexible work schedule, and that can be provided for him.
Yes. And then I would also, there's a lot of job or skills assessment tests out there. So depending on what his interests are, I would probably do that first to see what type of line of work he may be interested in doing, because there is a plethora of online jobs now, to see if he'd want to do like a call center or if he wanted to do HR himself, or if it wanted to be like a newspaper business, just what different type of line of work he may be interested in to help him keep him intrigued at home. I would also explore that for when going back to work, for his line of profession that he'd want to do, and then start exploring those remote opportunities that may be available that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Debbie says, thank you. We do use Google Workplace. I'll check it out. Thank you all.
Oh, you're welcome.
Excellent. Yeah, Google has a lot of resources available. That is very helpful. That and just clear, I know I don't have a disability, but I take advantage of all the great things that they offer. So yes.
Are there any other questions?
Okay, so this is our list of references. We do have one manuscript that's coming out, which we're pretty excited about. And then our second manuscript, we're in the midst of composing and working on right now. We've just received more data. So we're just now working on the new results from the surveys that just came in. And our goal, right, Courtney, our goal is to try to get it up over the end of the month.
Yes.
Look at the Journal of Human Resource Management, potentially is where we're going to send it.
Next slide, please.
And we'd like to acknowledge the Kalamazoo Human Resource Management Association and the Lakeshore Human Resource Management for being so open to the surveys. A little history behind the survey. We did have to go through about 5 amendments. The first organization said that they would send it out and then retracted because they didn't have the capacity. And then another organization within the state said, okay, yep, we'll send it out. And then they had a change in leadership and the leadership said no. And then we finally got to another organization and they said, again, we don't have the capacity to send this out, but you should probably try these 2 organizations. And we were grateful for the Kalamazoo and the Lakeshore Human Resource Management Associations. And then the Michigan Human Resource Management Conference allowed us to survey any participant that came to the conference live. And then we got their polls as well.
And then I know we kind of discussed this previously, but if there was any last minute questions or comments that you feel comfortable asking us, and then the next slide is actually our contact. So if you want to email one of us asking for more information, we know the slides will be shared at a later time, but feel free to reach out to us. And we appreciate you once again, everyone, for taking times out of your busy schedule to be with us on a Friday during lunch. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your lunchtime.
Yes, we appreciate
and sharing
it.
and sharing our passion for this particular topic.
Yes, we thank you. You're the reason that we keep going. So thank you for your interest in wanting to help others and learning more within your field and being the best that you could be. We appreciate you.